Savage Dragon 87 from May of 2001. Havoc in the Hidden City. Another action-packed issue of your favorite comic and mine. First up is a credit on the inside cover for Josh Eckhorn, who is so mean he shot a man for snoring too loud, which sounds like an overreaction, but is a real-life reference to John Wesley Hardin, a gun-toting outlaw from the Wild West and an inspiration for a Bob Dylan song. All right, we got the rest of the creative team credited here. Chris Eliopoulos letterer, Rudin Motown colors, Eric Larson story and art. So let's talk about this artwork. This is not the typical Larson style that we've come to expect after 87 issues. More of an open line style with less rendering, zero cross-hatching, and kind of a flat color technique. One big difference I noticed is the lack of body hair on our hero. You know, Dragon's a hirsute man with hairy arms and chest, but that detail seems lost in this style, as you can see on the title page here. So last issue, 86, Larson started this artistic experiment about halfway into the story when Dragon was transported to Kansas City to find Mighty Man. I guess Larson enjoyed the results, and he wanted to continue that with this month's story. So it would appear that Dragon has gone native in the Savage world, but that's just conjecture because we usually have a caption or some other expository narrative device filling us in, but this issue has none of that. We are thrust right into the action as Dragon swings into this double-page splash where a gigantic fish monster is attacking these hippies who were swimming in the lake. Apparently this fish guy is named Morris, but that's not really relevant because after Dragon dispatches Morris with a punch, we never see him again. But there's more danger still, more monsters. A pair of serpents emerge and attack Dragon, latching on to his arms, allowing him to slam their heads together and toss them like yesterday's garbage. The hippies have gotten their clothes back on, and they are ready to hit the road in their old Volkswagen van. Dragon decides to hitch a ride. So now these hippies may seem familiar to you, and eagle-eyed fanatics noticed their resemblance to the fabulous furry Freak Brothers. So I pulled this for reference, but the furry Freak Bros were created by Gilbert Shelton. They were kind of hairy, hard-partying, pot-smoking heroes of the underground comics scene. They predated Cheech and Chong as counterculture stoner icons. And that's not the only surprise. It appears that their lady friend here is none other than little orphan Annie herself, all grown up, really filling out that tank top. Now, I'm not 100% sure about the timeline, but I think at this point in 2001, the Annie comic strip had entered public domain, and so Larson was free to use that character in his comic. But he changed her enough where there probably wouldn't be any legal trouble anyway, but this would not be the last time that Larson would use public domain characters in his book. You know, why not? Later, he'll use like Captain Tootsie as a featured character, and more infamously, Mickey Mouse, who just entered public domain last year, so Larson took advantage of that. Anyway, back to the story. It appears someone is hunting down the Dragon. They are shaking down Ann Stevens' boyfriend here in Kansas City, trying to determine where he headed next. More on that later. So Dragon has discovered that there's a hidden city of the gods here on Earth, and he wants to recruit their help to take on Cyberface. So he thanks the hippies for the ride, and Annie decides to tag along as well. They'll have to hike up this mountain to reach the lost city of the gods. Dragon doing most of the work here. But it pays off, man. What a view. We get to this city, but you'll start to notice that the art is slowly returning to the usual Larson style, page by page and panel by panel. Like actually back here, you can kind of see in Dragon's face more rendering and hatching color gradients. It's kind of a cool idea to kind of slowly work that in and transition that way. So anyway, sadly, it turns out the hippies were killed after Dragon and Annie left. And we'll see that their attacker is this guy, the Seeker. He's flying around on his glider. A pretty cool looking villain, silent stalker, and a real cover boy. So here he is in this issue in his debut. And then later, in a Christmas issue, we see the Seeker again in 106. Then he makes a final appearance And perhaps the most controversial issue of the entire series, number 228. If you know, you know. And we'll get there eventually. But back to the story. Dragon and Annie arrive at the city of the gods, and we see Dragon's old pal Hercules here. You know, they were teammates, maybe rivals, but it's a short reunion as Hercules tells him to get the hell out of town. Apparently, the gods have made a deal with Cyberface. They don't mess with him, and he don't mess with them. And so since Dragon is a wanted man, they can't let him stay, and they want this dude gone immediately. So Annie and Dragon are leaving when they are attacked by the Seeker. He blasts the dragon, sending him crashing into Godtown. This allows Dragon to grab a pair of rocket boots and take to the sky. It does not go well, though. The Seeker has superior firepower, riddling the dragon with projectiles and blowing off his foot. So hobbled on one leg, Dragon loses control of the rocket boots, and he crashes into a tower, leaving a plume of smoke pouring out of the rubble. An eerie prediction of the 9/11 attacks a few months later. This leaves Annie alone and distraught with her hairy armpits. So that's all for the story, but we have plenty of comic book left, including Fanatics. But I wanted to make another point about the artwork before we do. So as I mentioned, like the art kind of the style transitions gradually in this issue. Like by the time we get to Godtown, you know, it seems like we are back to normal. Hercules here looks pretty much the same as he did 20 issues ago. And in response to the fans' reaction to this artistic experimentation, you know, Larson would say that other ongoing like monthly comics, they utilize fill-in artists and they'll change creative teams all the time with different art styles. And they do not receive the same kind of criticism and blowback that Savage Dragon would get when Larson would make these kind of changes in his own book. So it's kind of a valid point. It's pretty unfair. On to the letters with reaction to issue 85, including one of these by Gavin Hickenbotham. So this guy voices his displeasure with some of the characters that have started to appear in Savage Dragon, saying that they are too cartoony looking. And so Larson responds. He says that there's precedent for, in comics like The Spirit or Plastic Man, to have sidekicks or supporting cast members that are more cartoony than the title characters. And he finds that appealing. You know, why limit yourself to realism when the comics medium allows for creators to do anything they want? Why not play around a little bit with style, spread your wings? And you know, cartoony is not a bad word, Larson says. He is a cartoonist after all. Got another letter, this one by Jesus Garcia. He asked how Larson has been able to successfully navigate the ever-shrinking and volatile comic book market with his creator-owned book, while so many others have dropped off, including like his fellow Image founders, as well as like John Byrne. So Larson replies, he says, those guys are a bunch of weenies. But seriously, Larson mentions several factors, mostly his willingness to work for less money to continue to do the work that he loves. So shots fired at John Byrne here. Reality is that while he professes to love comics, what John Byrne truly loves is a fat paycheck, more so than any of the love for his characters. So, all right. More tea spilled. Larson talks about the current state of Spider-Man comics. Not great, in his opinion. This is all part of the ongoing debate about continuity and its limitations, specifically regarding like Marvel and DC comics. To be continued. We got one last letter by Jeff Dyer accusing Larson of ripping off other comic characters. So Jeff says like Mighty Man is derivative of Captain Marvel or Shazam. She-Dragon is like She-Hulk. Dark Lord is like Darkseid, etc. So Larson says that these aren't really ripoffs, but rather homages or homages. He says he's changing around enough of the details and the familiar tropes of these characters that there's kind of a subversion of readers' expectations. And, you know, he wants you to carry some baggage associated with these characters when he throws a curveball at you. And so he also says that this accusation is just as old as comics themselves, and he rattles off a list of heroes and their derivatives. He's like, even Superman could be called a ripoff of Doc Savage from pulp magazines, and Spider-Man was basically a knockoff of a character from Archie Comics called The Fly. I didn't even know that one. So should Larson never feature a character in armor because he could be accused of ripping off Iron Man? They're all good points here, but I'll move on. Moving on to the final Megaton Man story here in Savage Dragon. Maybe it continues on the website, but this is it for the Don Simpson comic, as Megaton Man gets his classic 80s costume back, and he waves goodbye one last time. Let's see, Desperate Times has a few funny gags in this one. Enjoy it while you can, because Chris Eliopoulos will be wrapping this one up as well in a few issues. That leaves Brainbert by Carl H. on the back cover. We got a cameo, Wolverine cameo, as well as one of the Desperate Times guys there on the last panel. All right, enough jibber jabber. Hope you enjoyed that one as we continue with issue 88 next week. Adios.